Okay, welcome everyone to this introduction to Redcap session. My name's Chris. I work at the Becker Medical Library at Washington University, and I provide data management and sharing services to our research community. And just to let you know, so for those of you who are considering getting Redcap for your organization, so my position is related to developing training and education. I'm not actually part of the IT group that installed or currently maintains Redcap, but everything I have heard from them is that it's relatively low maintenance compared to some other software. And I am going to go over what you need for installation, the steps needed to get Redcap. As I'm presenting, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions or type questions into the chat at any point. So what I'm going to go over is I'm going to give a broad overview of Redcap, talk about the requirements in order to get Redcap for your organization. I'll talk about the Redcap consortium because it's very useful to the people, both the users of Redcap as well as the administrators who maintain Redcap. And then I'll go through some basic terminology that you'll find within Redcap. And then the majority of the time I'm going to spend doing demonstrations. When I do the demonstrations, I'm going to go through just some of the basic features of Redcap. And because my understanding is many of you don't currently have Redcap, so I'm going to go a little faster than I normally would because what I normally do is go slowly enough that people can follow along. But since you don't currently have Redcap, I'm just going to kind of just give you a quick overview of things that can be done in Redcap. And I will show a place where you can go and find recordings that I have made that go a little more slowly so that you can follow along. So if you do get Redcap and then want to go through those recordings, you'll be able to find them. Okay, so Redcap stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. It's a web-based tool for building and managing databases and surveys. It was developed at Vanderbilt, and they provide it at no charge for nonprofit organizations. The caveat is that they provide it to you, but you have to install it and maintain it yourself. So you have to have someone dedicated to that. So that's one of the requirements that they have. Redcap's designed to be very user-friendly. It has point-and-click functionality, as you'll see. You don't need to be a web designer or a database administrator to create the databases and surveys within Redcap. It has built-in quality assurance, quality improvement features. I'll go over some of those when I talk about basic terminology. But just one that I highlighted here is at WashU, any data we have in Redcap gets backed up automatically every night, and every one of those backups get maintained for 30 days. So that's what we have set up at our institution. That is something you can do shorter, longer, the amount of time that backups are maintained, but that's one of the quality assurance nets that we have at WashU. And it is HARPO and HIPAA compliant. So the basic features that I'll cover today when I go through the demonstrations are just how to build an instrument and a survey. Again, I'm going to use the point and click functionality. I'll show you how to distribute surveys via email or by a public URL. And I'll also mention a QR code, which I won't be able to show that through the webinar. I'll show you how to import data that's already been collected. So if you've already got data that's stored in another location, you can import that to Redcap probably with some modifications to your current spreadsheet or wherever you have your data. You can use it to set up longitudinal projects. So if you're collecting data over a long period of time, you can set up longitudinal project in Redcap. And once you've collected your data within Redcap, you can export it to Excel or other statistical package for data cleaning and data analyses. And I will point out, Redcap is really great for collecting and capturing and maintaining data, But as far as creating graphs, doing statistical analyses, it is not great for that. Its purpose is to collect the data and store the data, and then to export it to something else for further analyses. Okay, so technical requirements, where you go to get the full list of this is projectredcap.org. If you just type in Redcap to Google, you'll be able to get there. As I mentioned earlier, you must have someone who can install and support Redcap. So you have to have some sort of IT to be able to do that. Again, even though I've not been on that end of it, all indications are it is relatively low maintenance. And on the website, it says that one person can manage hundreds of projects. So if your organization was going to have a lot of projects, it's not like you need a big team of people to maintain that. So what you'll do, the first step, if you want to have Redcap at your organization, is to sign a license agreement with Vanderbilt. You will then receive the source code to be able to upload Vanderbilt, and then some of the requirements are a web server with PHP, a MySQL, MySQL database server, and an SMTP email server, or simple mail transfer protocol email server, and then an optional file server. But you can get a much more detailed list of that if you go to projectredcap.org and then click join. I want to talk about the Redcap consortium. So there's over 4,600 institutions worldwide that have Redcap. Why that's important is because once you have Redcap at your organization, the IT person or the administrator, the Redcap administrator, will have access to the Redcap community site, which has its knowledge base and administrators forum, basically a large question and answers forum. I do have access to that, and it's incredibly helpful, both to find out when somebody asks me, hey, can Redcap do that, do this or that? And if I don't know, I'll go to that administrators forum and I can find answers. Also, for people who maintain the back end of Redcap, there is a ton of information about that. So even though Vanderbilt doesn't provide you any direct support, there is a huge community of users where the people who maintain Redcap are able to go and get answers. There's also a Redcap conference every year for administrators. Again, not for Redcap users, but for the people who maintain Redcap. I attended that this year because it was virtual and it was free. Again, very useful to take for people who maintain Redcap, and also for people who provide education and training for Redcap users like myself. For people who are using Redcap, you can find a ton of tutorials on Google, YouTube, wherever on the internet. For example, if you just typed in survey password Redcap to Google, you would find a ton of documentation and videos on how to do that. Also, just to do a little self-promotion here, every webinar I have done since we went to work from home, I have recorded and put online, available for anybody. And while we're here, I'll just show you quickly how to get there. So if you go to our website, which is becker.wustl.edu, that's our library website, or if you type in Becker Medical Library to Google, if you go to services, you'll find data management and sharing. And if you scroll down, you'll find information about Redcap workshops. And if you go to free view recordings of previous workshops, I have a long list of training materials here. These are open, available to anybody with internet access. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this introduction to Redcap is really, it has demonstrations where I move through everything a little more slowly so you can follow along. So if you get Redcap and you want to go through the basics, you can come back to this recording and go through and follow along with that. Okay, so why is Redcap, why go through the trouble? And I just want to talk about some of the features of Redcap, which are better than, collecting data and putting it directly into a spreadsheet. So some of the features are easier discrimination between fields or data entry points. There's a lot of room for error when you're entering data into spreadsheets or databases. Redcap has some features to help decrease the risk of error. Another one is data validation. So as you're creating data entry points, you can do data validation and say this point has to be a date, and if it's not a date, it'll be an error. Or you can say this point has to be a number with 2 decimal places, and if it's not entered that way, it will be an error. You can make data entry mandatory. So if you have some data points that you must collect and some that are not as important, and for some people you may not collect them, you can leave those as optional, but you can make fields mandatory. Some things you can't see here are you can mark cells as identifiers. So if you're collecting protected health information, you can mark fields as identifiers, and there's ways to protect that from having anybody that the protected health information going into the wrong hands. It automatically logs everything that's done within a project. So everybody has a username and password, and when they sign in and do anything to a project, Redcap logs who's doing what. So, so you're able to, if something happens to your project, if something gets changed, and it wasn't a change that you wanted to make, you can go back and see who did that and when that change was made. And it has built-in security features. So as I mentioned here at WashU, we have to log in with our username and password. And there's many other security features as well. So just a simplified workflow here. So if you're collecting data, if you're having research participants come in or patients come in to your clinic or to your lab, you can still collect your data with pen and paper. This laboratory notebook is more for basic scientists, but then you can transfer what you need to be stored digitally, Redcap, or you can skip this step of taking things with hard copy and either enter directly into Redcap via a data entry form or by a survey. In a survey, you can send to your patients or research participants directly via email or with a public URL. Once you have enough data collected that you're ready to analyze it or put it in graphs, you can export your data to either Excel or other common statistical packages, and you get a data export into a nice organized spreadsheet. Okay, now I'm going to go through some additional basic terminology here. This will be maybe a little boring, but I like to do this before actually jumping into Redcap. So Redcap projects are either a full database or it can be as small as a single survey. So if I wanted to send out an evaluation about this session, I could just have a project that consisted of only one single survey. You can also have a database that consists of hundreds of surveys with a lot of people filling it out. But they're made up of web-based data collection tools called instruments, which can be either data collection instruments or surveys, which I will talk about once we get into Redcap. And when you start in a project, it's in what's called development status. And once you have it set the way you want it to be, you move it to production status. And I want to talk a little bit more about development versus production status. And this is specific to WashU, but I assume you will want to set it up somewhat similar. So development status, as its name suggests, is very easy to make edits and iterations. So how it works generally is one person sets up the Redcap project, sends it out to other people on the project team. They provide feedback, and the original person makes edits and changes based on that feedback. Once everything is set up in place, you move to production status. And one thing I'll mention about development status, at least at Washington University, is that at that point, data is not backed up to the server. Okay, so you can collect what's kind of like practice data while you're testing, and then you can delete that data before you move to production. Once you're in production, data is backed up nightly and stored for 30 days. When you're in production status, you can still make modifications to your project, but some modifications will are required to go through an approval by an administrator, which is basically just to prevent you from losing data. But you can still make modifications after switching from development to production status. Okay, so I've mentioned the word instrument a few times. So your project is made up of instruments, either a single instrument or many instruments. So here, the screenshot over here on my right is a list of data collection instruments for a project. So you can see I have some demographics, baseline data, some follow-up data. And these can be either data collection instruments, which are, when I say data collection instruments, that is an instrument where you will input data from Redcap, and it would be from a study team member entering data. They can also be set up as surveys, and surveys are something that you can distribute to research participants directly, and then the person just fills it out, and that is automatically stored in Redcap. Okay, so I have my list of instruments here. So if I were to click on demographics, I could have a data entry form that looks like this. If I were to click on baseline data, I've got some blood measurements here. And then if I looked at my generalized anxiety disorder, this is a survey that I could send out directly to a participant, and they could fill this out, and it would automatically be stored in Redcap. Each data collection instrument is made up of a series of fields or data entry points. There's many different kinds of fields, such as text box, multiple choice, calculated fields. I'll show you how to make each of those, and they are easily customized based on the type of data you want to be entered. And this is just highlighting that these can be edited and modified at any time. When you create a field, this is the field creation box that comes up when you're creating your data entry points. And I just want to point out a few attributes of this. The three things that are required are a field label, which is considered human readable. So if you were using a survey, this is where you would write out the full question. Then there's a variable name, this box here, which is what's considered machine readable. And I'll talk a little bit more about machine readable versus human readable on the next slide. But it's just a shorter version of your field label. The field type is what determines what's going to be entered. So a text box is just free text. You can also do multiple choice. You could have a calculated field that calculates values based on values entered in other data entry points. Some optional information are data validation. So here's where you can say this field has to be a date, or this field has to be an email address, things like that. You can make a field required. You can mark a field as an identifier, and then you can change some alignment to your field, and you can add some notes to your fields, and I'll show you how to do all of that. And just one more slide about the field label versus the variable name. So this screenshot here is a data entry form, and you can see this is my field label that's human readable. What is participant's age? And then hiding in the background is a machine readable variable name that I've created, which is just lowercase h. Now, the reason it's machine readable is because what happens in the background of Redcap is all data that gets entered into this age field gets connected to this age variable. Why that's important is if I'm going through my project and I decide, well, I want to change this variable name age, essentially what I'm doing is deleting this column of data and creating a new column. So this machine readable age variable is important to just keep as is, whereas this human readable field label can be modified throughout the life of the project. So with that, I think I'm going to just go ahead and switch over to Redcap. Does anybody have any questions at this point? And again, feel free to ask questions as we go through. So I've already logged into Redcap, and your Redcap login would look a little different than ours. So I just went ahead and logged in ahead of time. And when I come to Redcap, I just come to a page that tells a little bit about Redcap. I have a help and FAQ. There's also some built-in training videos from Vanderbilt that you can access from here. And then I'm going to click this list of my projects. So I have a lot of projects because anytime I do a presentation like this, I save it at least for a little while, or if I do consultations with people, I save those. You can even see here, I did some practice sessions getting ready for this session, and I saved those projects. So you probably won't have as many projects as I do. But I'm going to go ahead and create a new project now to demonstrate some different things. And I'll just call this Intro to Redcap with today's date. And then you select a purpose of the project. So for today, I'll do practice just for fun. If you're doing research, you would select this. Operational support, if I do evaluations for webinars that I do for WashU, I put those as operational support. But for today, I'm just going to put practice just for fun. And then I create project. And I have my project created. So I come to a tab called Project Setup, and what you can see here is I'm in development, excuse me, sorry about that. I'm in development mode here, and my goal is to go through, create a project and move it to production status. And this Project Setup page is designed to be a checklist of steps to get through in order to go to the bottom, which is move to production status. I won't go through all of these today. Primarily where I'm going to be is in the Online Designer. So I'm going to go ahead and click into the Online Designer. And now I'm where my data collection instruments are. And it starts with a first instrument, just called My First Instrument. So what I'm going to do is click into this, and I can just create some fields. So the first field of the first instrument is always some sort of identifier, a record identifier. So this cannot be changed. It has to stay there. But I'm going to go ahead and add some fields. I'll make this first field a text box, and we'll just say, we're just collecting some basic information about a person. So first we'll start with their name. And I'll mark this as an identifier. Oops. And say that it's required. Okay. I'll add some more fields here. Let's say I'm going to do date of birth. I'll call this variable name DOB. And then over here in text validation, I'm going to change it to a date, and I'm going to say month, day, year. I could also add some minimum and maximums here if I knew that there should be no dates, no date of birth below, like January 1st, 1950. I could put that in here. And that just would, if I tried to put a date outside that range, I'd get a warning. I'm going to say this one's required. It's also an identifier, and I'll save it. Now, because I validated this as a date, I automatically get this little calendar button that people can use when they're entering data. Or if the date is today, I can click that and get today's date. Now I'm going to change this field type to notes, and we'll say this is where somebody can fill in their address. Again, I'll say required and identifier. And I've got, now you can see I have a big notes box as opposed to a text box. So I've got more room to write. So I could do street, you know, and then city, state, and zip here. So I just have more room to do that. Now, if you were making your own project, you could separate this to where you have a text box for street address, text box for city, state, and zip code. But for today's purpose, I'll just make a notes box for address. switch back to a text box and I'll say phone number. And for validation, I will change this to a phone number, North America. Now, when I when I do that, it's for a 10-digit North America phone number, and the first 6 digits have to be correct. When I go to enter data in here, if I were to enter a completely fake phone number, I would get a warning. So this is one of those quality improvement features that just helps ensure that your data is being entered correctly. And I'll add a space for email. Again, I'm going to make the validation. I'll change that to email. So this field has to have an @ some domain dot something when it's entered, or it will be, you'll get an error message. Just a few more fields here. So let's say I add height, and I can change this to a number. So I'll change it to a number. You could also add a certain number of decimal places. If you just do number, you can have as many decimal places as you'd like. You could also do an integer, which is a number with no decimal places. So if you had an age category and you didn't want any decimal places, you could use integer, but I'm going to use number. I'll add a space for weight. Also call this one a number. Then I'll add another field. I'm going to change this to a calculated field, and we'll say I want to calculate body mass index based on a person's height and weight. And what I'm going to do here in this calculation equation is I'm going to put the calculation for body mass index here using my height and weight variables. But for this specific equation, Redcap actually has this stored. So I'm going to click on this, how do I format the equation? And I'm going to scroll down to common examples of calculated fields. And I can see I have this BMI calculation. We're going to say mine are in inches and pounds. So I'm going to select that. Just going to copy that. And I'll paste it in here. And so what you can see here is I've got my weight divided by height times 703, which is the calculation for BMI, for body mass index, when height is in inches and weight is in pounds. And actually, it would probably be good if I was making this to add that this height is in inches, the weight is in pounds. And that's a good time to mention that everything I'm doing here as far as field label, variable name, none of this is written in stone. This can all be what works best for you. And then just to show you some of the multiple choice, so you can do a multiple choice drop-down list. So let's say I was doing gender. And then I add my choices down here. And how you add choices is by adding a code for each choice, which is generally a number, and then a comma, a space, and then the choice. And I'm just going to use the NI categories, which are female, male, unknown, not reported. But you could certainly add more categories of gender here. So now I have a drop-down menu that has female, male, unknown, not reported. And when you export data, when we export data later, you'll see that I can export either the value female, male, unknown, not reported, or I can export the 1, 2, or 3 that was coded for that, for value. And I'm just going to edit this real quick and just show you there's another option that's called radio buttons. And I can save that. And so now instead of a drop-down menu, I have radio buttons. So that's completely your call. It can change based on choices. For me, if I have just a few choices, like 3, I prefer radio buttons over a drop-down. But again, that's personal preference. Another multiple choice can be checkboxes. And we'll just say, maybe we have a list of medical conditions here. And the difference here is that you can check all that apply. Whereas with the drop-down menu or the radio boxes, you can only check one. Let's say I'm going to ask about cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke, and then maybe I have an other category. And so here you can see I just have checkboxes that I can check more than one. And then I'll just add one more field to show what's called branching logic. So let's say I have a field here that says, if other medical condition, please list here. And then what I'll do is add branching logic, which is this green icon here. Maybe. There we go. And I can just, basically what this is I only want that field to appear if somebody checks the other medical condition. So I do other medical conditions, other. So if somebody checks, then they're going to have the space to fill in the field for other medical conditions. Okay, so that covered the most basic types of fields. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to add records and enter data. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So to add a record, and so for this type of study, a record would pretty much be a person. If you were doing basic research, it might be a sample or or an animal or something like that. But for our purposes, it's a person. So I'm going to go to Add, Edit Records, and I'm going to add a new record. And because I have one instrument, it opens directly to my instrument. And so this is, as it is now, this is a data entry form. Because to enter data here, I'd have to be logged into Redcap. And I'll show you in a minute how to activate this as a survey and how to distribute it. So you could send it to somebody to fill out, and that could be somebody who doesn't have the ability to log into Redcap. So let's say I have a participant come to my clinic, and I just have my computer open and I'm collecting this data. So I just ask, what's your name, first and last? And I'm filling this out as somebody gives me their information. They give me their birth date. I could either enter it directly here, say that's not my actual birth date, but I can either enter it that way, or I can enter it with my little calendar function. And street address, the address to the library, and then phone number. So if I entered anything that wasn't a phone number here, I get an error, I get a warning. So I have to enter a phone number. Even if I enter a 10-digit phone number and the first 6 digits aren't correct, I'm going to get a warning. So the first 6 digits have to be a legitimate area code, a North American phone number. So once I have that, it's correct. So it's just a quality improvement measure trying to reduce the risk of error that these have to be legitimate North American phone number, since I use the text validation phone number. And then same here, if I enter anything that's not in an email format, it's going to tell me I need to enter it in an email format. So now I'm okay. And then as I enter a person's height and weight, once I'm out of there, it automatically calculates a BMI. And there is a way to round this off if you don't want the 15 decimal places. Then I can select my gender, and I can select whatever medical conditions. And once I select other, then I have a place to fill out my other medical conditions. If I click out of that, it's gone. But if I click in here, then I have the opportunity to add other medical conditions. Once I'm done, I have this field's automatically added to all data collection instruments. The default is incomplete, and then as you go through, I can mark this as complete. Or if I was going to have someone to come through and double check my work, I could mark this as unverified, and have somebody else come check my work and then mark complete. For today, I'll just go ahead and mark complete. And so you can see now I have a little green mark here. If I go to this record status dashboard, this shows all records. So I was ID number 1. What you'll see here in a minute is that this is just a nice way to see what records have had data entered and which haven't. Okay, so let's say you're interested in getting Redcap. You've already been collecting data on a project for a while, and you say, well, I don't want to start a Redcap project now. I already have data collected. Well, you can actually import data that you've already collected in another location. So let's just say I have that data. So I just created that form, but I've already collected these 5 people, and I've stored it. I've stored their data in an Excel spreadsheet. Well, as long as I modify this to match the variable names that I've put in Redcap, I can import this directly into Redcap. So if I go to Data Import Tool, and actually once you're here, you can select this Download Your Data Import Template. And I get a template where if I've got data already collected, I can just either copy and paste these column names to that form, or I could paste my data into here. But once I'm ready, I can actually import data directly into here. So I just need to change the date template. And then I find my data, select Upload File. And then you can see I've got my data that I just showed you in an Excel spreadsheet, and I can select Import Data. Now if I go to my record status dashboard, you can see I now have some additional data points here. These came through, so the red means that they're marked as incomplete, and that's just because I didn't have that column on my Excel spreadsheet. So I could just go in here, change this to complete. Now if I go to my record status dashboard, that one's marked as complete. So if you've got a spreadsheet that has a lot of data already in it, you can import that into your Redcap project. And now what I'm going to show is how to deploy that instrument that I created as a survey. So rather than participants coming to your clinic and you entering data into Redcap, you could also email this to them or send it to them in some other way. So in order to do that, I go to my project setup where I started. And the first option here on project setup is to enable using surveys in this project. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll then go to the online designer, and I'll click, now you have this option to enable as survey. So I'll go ahead and enable that. And there's just some things you can do here. So you can give a message at the top of your survey. I'm not going to go through all of these survey settings. I do have a recording that goes into more depth into surveys. What I am going to do is add a survey specific email invitation field. And I'll go ahead and select email, my email field that I created. And I will allow people to save and return later. And you can choose whether they need to have a code to return later. Or I'll say I do want them to have a code. And then you can send a confirmation email to the person when they've completed their survey. So I will add that. You can select who it will be from. Then you can add a subject and a message. And then I'll save changes. Once this has been set up as a survey, I can use these survey distribution tools to deploy this. So you have a public survey URL, which is just a long web address. So this is good if you're sending out an email. So say I was going to give us an anonymous survey to like everyone at WashU. I could send out an email to all WashU employees and have a link to this survey in here. So if I copy this, if I just open a new tab, paste it, now I've got that instrument that I created as a survey. So I'll just enter a little bit of stuff here. Some fake data. I'll leave these blank just so I'll just show here. So if I click other, then I've got the place where I can enter other data. I'll just go ahead and fill this out while I'm here. Then when I submit, if I go back in Redcap, if I go to my record status dashboard, I now have a record ID 10. And this record ID 10 has a green check mark as opposed to these other ones that just have green dots. And the check mark indicates that it was taken as a survey. So you can tell which people took it as a survey and which ones just had data entered directly into Redcap. Okay. If I go back to survey distribution tools, I can also create a custom survey link. So let's say I don't like that big long survey URL. I could do something like OT study. And then I've got a shorter link that's the same, gets me to the same place as this longer one. So if I copy this, paste it, I get that same survey. You can also get an embed code, this is HTML code that you could put directly into a web page, and then this text here at the end that says "click here to take a survey." It would say this, and a person could go to your web page, click on that, and then the survey would automatically open. You can also add a reCAPTCHA feature to your survey, which if you're not familiar with that, I'll just click on this. It's the little thing that you click that says "I'm not a robot." So if you're worried about bots taking your survey, you can add this to make sure it's a human taking your survey. And you can also get a QR code. See if this will open for me. So you could print this. So say, for example, you are going out to Forest Park and you are surveying people at Forest Park, or you are asking people in Forest Park to be part of your survey. You could have this QR code and they could scan that with their phone and the survey would automatically open on their phone. So that's another way that you could distribute your surveys. And you also have this participant list. And so all the people that I've added to my participant list, their emails have already automatically populated here in this participant list. But you can also add people here. So let's say I wanted to add somebody, I'll add my own email address again. And I'll just add a couple. I'll add a fake one here as well. So you can add people that way. So my Sorensen, so this is the one I just added. This is a little confusing because I have two with my email here. And then I've got this fake one twice, but the ones that don't have a record ID next to them, those are the ones I just added. This is useful if you have a set number of people, say you're having a class of 15 people and then you want to send them a survey afterwards, you could add those 15 emails into here, click add participants, and then distribute your survey that way. So if I do compose survey invitation, I'll just add it to my email. So I'm only checking my email here. And then I have an email here. I'll just put my name. So this is the email that the person's going to receive. Call it list. And they're going to get an email with the survey links included. And I'm going to go ahead and select send invitations. So my email has been sent. So I'm sending that to myself. If I click this survey invitation log, I can see that this survey was sent at 12:51, which is the time now. And I'll bring my email over. So there's sometimes a little bit of a delay. So I should be getting an email here soon with the URLs. Doesn't look like it's come through just yet. So sometimes the Redcap server is going a little bit slow, but I can view this invitation. So what it'll look like when it comes through my email is it'll say, please take this survey, and it will have this link in here where I can click and open it from my email. Oh, there it is. So through. So this is the email a participant would get. You could customize this message, but just what happens is I can click open that from my email. One other way to distribute the emails or the surveys, I'm going to go to Online Designer. You can set up an automated invitation. And this works really well for longitudinal studies, where you could say, send my follow-up survey 2 weeks after they complete the baseline survey. So what I could do here is, well, since I only have one, which actually one of the last things I was going to show was how to set up a longitudinal project, and then I'll come back to these automated invitations. I'm going to go to Project Setup, and I'm going to enable longitudinal data collection with defined events. And then I'm also going to scroll down and enable this scheduling module. And then what I can do is define events. Let's say my first event is baseline. And then I can save that. I can add a new event. Let's say it's follow-up. And then I can say it's 14 days after baseline. And I could also give a range, say of plus or minus 2 days. So if my follow-up fell on a weekend, I could have it be plus or minus 2 days if I wanted it to be a weekday. So I'll go ahead and add that new event. And then I go to designate instruments for my event. I only have one instrument, but I'll just make it so I'm sending that for both the baseline and the follow-up. Now, if I go to my record status dashboard, what I can see is now I have a second instrument for each person, and one's at baseline, one's at follow-up. If I go back to my Online Designer, I can set up an automated invitation for the follow-up survey. And I'll say when baseline survey is completed, I'm going to send the follow-up survey 14 days after the baseline survey. So what that does is if I completed this today, 2 weeks from today, I would receive an email with the follow-up survey automatically. You can also add what's called advanced logic. So if you only wanted this to go to somebody, if you only wanted it to go to females, or if you only wanted it to go to people who had cardiovascular disease, you could add some advanced logic here, where it says after the baseline instrument is completed, and if somebody says they have cardiovascular disease, they'll receive this email 14 days after sending. If I activate that, then in 2 weeks, I would receive the follow-up survey after completing the baseline instrument. I'm actually not going to activate that right now. Okay. The thing I'll show you is just the user rights, which is how you add more people to your project. And so anybody within the WashU organization that has a Redcap account, I can add them to my project, and then they would be able to come in and work in my project. So let's say I was going to add Jessica to my project. I would start typing her name and I would find it. And then I could say add with custom rights. And here's where you can choose what a person can do in your project. So I could give her access to do project design and setup, which is essentially everything that I showed today. I could say she could add other users to the project. Showing what data she can export. So I could give her only access to de-identified data or removed tagged identifiers, which means anything I marked as PHI, she would not be able to export, or I can give her full data set so she could export the full data set. And then there's just some other options down here that I could give her the ability to do. And then I can have her send an email to let her know she's been added to my project. I'm actually not going to do that right now, but just to show you how that's done. And so now we have some data in here, and I will show, I just realized I did not show how to export data. So if I go to data exports, reports, and stats, I can click here, and I can view all my data. So I can view a report. So here you can see all the data. So this first line, first row is the data that I entered. Records 5 through 9 are the data that I imported. And then this number 10 is what I took as a survey. And you can see the survey has a survey timestamp. So you know exactly what date and time the person took the survey. I can then click export data, and I can choose to export this into Excel file, either with raw data or labels or other statistical software. So I'll just say Excel raw data, then click here. And now I have an Excel file with my data that I collected. And you'll see I did raw data, so my gender is in 2s and 1s. My medical conditions are either 0s or 1s, depending on if the person checked the box. And I can also export this with the actual values. So if I do export data or labels, now you can see I have males, female, rather than the 1s and 2s, and then checked and unchecked on my multiple medical conditions here. So here you see I have cardiovascular disease, and you can see who checked or did not check the box. Okay, it is 12:59. I'm willing to stay on and take any questions. I know that was fast, but again, if you get Redcap for your organization and you want some more detailed instruction that you can follow along, goes a little slower through each of those features that I covered. This webpage, this becker.wustl.edu, data management and sharing Redcap workshop recordings, has a number of topics here. I've got a ton of recordings that go through individual topics and go slow enough for you to follow along. So does anybody have any questions? You can type them into chat or unmute yourself if you'd like. Okay, well, I will bring back my slides. I'll just put So my email address is sorensenc@woostel.edu. If you have questions later, feel free to send me any questions or contact any of the folks who set this meeting up today, and they can contact me as well if you have any follow-up questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. I know we have a few folks too that have asked for the recording, so we'll be sure to get that out to people as well.
Sounds good. I'll get it to you soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks everyone who came.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.